So I guess to think about the pros of working with an agency, I mean, I started with an agency. I don't know if you did. Like, was one of your first clients an agency, or have you not really gotten into that game yet?
No, I mean, I've worked with agencies, but it wasn't how I started exactly.
Okay.
Maybe actually, now that I think about it, I started with a web design shop. So
Okay.
good,
Yeah. Yeah.
good point.
So
You're
I
you're totally
started
right.
with Market 8. Did you
Yeah,
do
yeah,
work
yeah,
with
yeah. I
Market
know
8? I
them.
think I actually told Eduardo from Market 8 to contact you at one point
I've been in
because
touch with him for sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So what happened there was, I was working full time at a startup. I quit my job once I landed a couple of clients, and one of the first clients was actually Market 8, which is like a B2B SaaS agency. They do design, copywriting, all that stuff. And so that is who I think is best suited to work with an agency. And I mean, the main reasons for that on my end, from my personal experience with Market 8, was it kind of felt like I still had a job, even though I didn't. So my arrangement was like on a retainer. And so I knew that every month I was going to work X amount of hours and I was going to get X dollars no matter what. Which is huge when you're just starting out because you're kind of worried about if you're actually going to get any clients and how steady they're actually going to be coming through your inbox. Um,
And
the
and
other
Josh, when
one,
you said, sorry, real quick, when you said like that's who it's best for, do you mean like people who are transitioning out of a full-time gig? Is that what you mean?
yeah, yeah, I think
Okay.
that's the best place to start. And obviously, like I said, pay on a steady basis, kind of like having a job, which is awesome. You can leverage their reputation. So if your agency that you're working with has already worked with a bunch of SaaS companies and they're trusted in the space, it doesn't matter that you're new because there's a good chance the client won't even know about you. So I guess that also leads into the other idea, which you don't have to close projects, which is awesome because when you're just starting out, sales calls are terrifying. You don't know how much you should ask for, if you're being too greedy, or if you're letting them get away with something by asking for the rates that you're asking for. So that whole sales process is taken out of it, and you can really just focus on your craft, which is important in the early days because like I don't think you have to be the best to make the most money in a space. Part of that really does come down to marketing and sales, but a certain amount of competency is definitely required. Um, I guess another thing that was nice for me, and I don't know if it's always this way because Market Eight's, I think they're the only agency I've really worked under, is they were super organized. So they had processes in place, templates, software working together, different teams working together, and I learned a lot from that whole experience. Just how to even think about landing pages and how to think about working with design and SEO and developers and stuff like that. So that those are some of the major pros for me. I don't know if there's anything you want to dig into there or add.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. On that last point in particular, like I think one thing that's really important is that, is the agency you're gonna sort of the ceiling, the agency you work with is gonna set like a floor and a ceiling on the quality of work you do. So if you're working
Mm-hmm.
with an agency that doesn't really have their stuff together and they don't have those processes and maybe they don't really get, copywriting or whatever it is, then that's going to, do the opposite, right? It's just going to kind of drag you
Exactly.
down.
That's true.
So that's, I think for me, I've recently not been working with agencies, but I am talking to a couple of agencies right now. And these are teams that like really know their stuff. They get marketing. They have, all these companies that they've produced pretty impressive results for. And so, that I think is a huge part of it because you're basically plugging into their team. And so if it's a good team, that's great for you. If it's not a good team, run the other way. Um,
100%.
and there was something else you mentioned that about like who agency relationships are good for. So you were talking about people who are just transitioning out of a traditional 9 to 5 or corporate gig or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think another audience that it could be really good for is like people who are just introverted in general. I know there are a lot of copywriters who are just naturally introverted. And if you really hate sales, you were talking about this earlier, is like if you're just still like learning how to write copy and getting the fundamentals down, that maybe you don't want to learn how to do sales and copywriting at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I do recommend getting good at sales and all of that, but you know, if you're introverted and you don't want to get on the phone with all of these different people, working with an agency, you know, maybe it's one or two people who you have a good relationship with, and maybe you don't have to meet all that many different people. Maybe you're just working almost one-on-one with someone and getting fed all of these projects. So could be a huge advantage there. I still encourage people to learn sales, even if they're introverted. But, you know, I think if I were more introverted than I am, that would probably be one of the things that I would look at.
Yeah. And I mean, it is worth noting though, that if you are an introvert, you 100% can learn to sell. Like me in my daily life, very much an introvert. I do not seek out groups. I've got a few friends, and like, I'm like your classic introvert. Stay in, read books, things like that. So, but once the sales call starts, I can turn it on for that 30 minutes. We can have a good conversation, and then, you know, the rest of my day isn't so great because I'm exhausted after a couple sales calls. But yeah, it can be done.
Tiring. Yeah, yeah. The emotional labor of it, I guess, meeting new people and having these like somewhat high stakes conversations. Not that they're necessarily really high stakes, but
yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, so cons, I guess. One that I think you mentioned was the lower pay. When we talked about this before, you tend to get paid less when you work with an agency. I don't know if you want to talk about why that might be, if you have experience with that, but I can certainly as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll start off with some quick thoughts, and then I'm sure you'll have stuff to add. So, I think one of the biggest differences is, you know, when I'm talking to a SaaS business, I'm basically selling them a good chance at getting a certain sort of business outcome. Like a lot of times it's like, you know, getting like a higher conversion rate, generating more leads, things like that. And so there's this idea of like the return on investment. Whereas with an agency, you know, basically like what I'm selling when I'm talking to an agency is I will make you look good while you still get to maintain whatever margin you have built into the project. And that's something that I've had that experience in the past where an agency is hiring me for a project that they've already, you know, worked out with, that they already have a contract in place. And so, you know, they're basically looking at a number of, you know, here's how much margin we have. We have to hire someone to write the copy. And so if they're going to make a profit, or if they're going to make as much of a profit as they want, then that puts a very clear ceiling on how much I can charge them for that project. I don't know if I've done this as much because I don't have a ton of experience working with agencies, but you know, sometimes if you're working with an agency and they haven't necessarily closed a project yet, then you can sort of share your rates and they can bake that in. But again, you're still playing with this idea that there's someone between you and the people who are ultimately going to get the outcome, or the business is ultimately going to get the outcome, that also needs to make a profit. So you're getting a slice of the pizza, not the whole pizza yourself. So I think that's probably the biggest difference. And another note on price, and in you know, what you get in turn for that is that you don't have to find and close the client on your own. The other thing is that I think agencies, if you're going to have a continued relationship with them, that they have a lot of value in price certainty. So like knowing that your price is going to be the same next month as it was this month. Obviously, you know, people raise rates over time, but you know, I think you and I both are the kind of people who we like to get really custom with the pricing for every individual client and every individual project. Agencies, I think, are going to want a little bit more of like that menu of like, okay, how much does this thing cost? How much does that thing cost? And I would bundle that concept under price certainty, which is something that I don't really like to give.
Exactly. Yeah, they want price certainty and availability as well. So both of those things can be hard to do. Yeah, and another piece to that too, which kind of puts a ceiling on what you can usually charge with an agency, is if an agency is contacting you for copy, it's probably not their core competency. They're probably like a design agency or an ad agency or something like that. And so their client didn't come to them thinking about copy first and foremost. It just happens to be something they need for this project. And so that can also put a ceiling on it, versus if someone contacts you or me directly, like they're usually someone who values copy. They know that it's a big problem and that it's costing them a ton of money. And so they're usually willing to pay, you know, a little bit more. And yeah, so the piece you said makes total sense that an agency should pay you less than you would get on your own, because they are closing the client. They're usually managing the client for you as well. And yeah, those margins will eventually get you. And that was my experience. So like I said, I worked with Market 8. They were awesome to work with. No complaints about them or the team. But eventually what happens is, as you start to get more established in the space, you start having some inbound leads coming in directly, and you're closing those deals, and you're able to kind of feel out the prices, you know, like how price sensitive they are. And then all of a sudden that steady paycheck from the agency just isn't as interesting anymore. And then you go back to the agency, you tell them the new rate that would make sense, and it just doesn't make sense, because like they have margins they need to mind as well. And so it makes sense for them to find kind of the next copywriter who's up and coming, where they can, I guess you could say, like find almost like a diamond in the rough. You know, they're going to be really good one day. They're already pretty good. And for the time being, they're willing to accept less than they probably will get a year or two from now. And that's the constant dance that agencies are doing. Yep. I guess the other thing, and so I mentioned that one of the pros of working with an agency is that they already have processes in place, and so you can just jump in and you can learn a lot. But once you've been around for a while, you have your own processes, right? And so it becomes very difficult to plug into another company's process. You're going to be fighting it all the way through, because after, 2-3+ years, you do things the way you do them for a very specific reason. You've learned a lot over several dozen clients. And so you have processes in place. You're more efficient this way. You're more effective. And it just kind of hurts to put that all to the wayside and just go back to where you started, which was taking orders, which is, it starts to feel a little bit like you've got a job again. And once you taste that freedom of doing things your way, it's really hard to go back to that. So I'm sure there's some agencies out there where they allow a copywriter to just kind of do their thing. But I haven't seen it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I've had some agencies where they kind of like, they value copy, and that's part of, maybe there is some sort of growth element of what they're selling. So they're not, it's not like a design agency where they're selling design. They are selling something along the same lines of what I would be selling if it was copy, which is some sort of business outcome. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've had a couple where they've hired me and just sort of been like, we don't really know how to do this, so we'll sort of follow your process. And, so things like, whatever, like walking a client through a wireframe, which is something that not every copywriter does. But it's huge. I mean, it's a indispensable part of my process now. And so I've done that with agencies where they've let me, go ahead and present the wireframe to the actual people at the end. I probably should have charged more for that, but yeah. So I think as with anything else, you are going to find an incredible amount of variety.
I guess another big con, which isn't as important as, getting the money through the door in the early days, is it's not uncommon when you work with an agency to not be able to use the logos, because the company is your agency's client, the agency is your client, and agency logos just aren't as desirable to have on your your homepage and whatnot as like HubSpot or Deputy or Invicti in your case, or so that will eventually become a con as well.
Testimonials too, same thing. Like
testimonials, yeah, it'll be from the
this
agency.
One person.
Yeah, but yeah, it'll just be the agency over and over again, basically, and never naming the client. Yeah, for sure. So that becomes a con for sure, because like I know for me, I have no idea how to do this, but I could probably attribute hundreds of thousands of dollars to the fact that I worked with HubSpot in my second year of business. I don't know how many people that helped close, but I imagine plenty saw HubSpot and are like, oh, he's probably pretty good, right? And then that more or less closed a deal. So those logos do become really important. Yeah, and I think I mentioned this already. It starts to feel like you're not running the show because you aren't, which is okay right, when you're early on. But once you've run the show and you've run it successfully, it's really hard to give up that control. And I'm to the point now where I won't. if I were to
Yep.
work with an agency, and I can talk a little bit about, well, I will talk a little bit about how I'm about to work with an agency. So, I had, I had a client and they reached out to me again. They needed some design work. And so I referred them to an agency, Tiller Digital, awesome Canadian web design digital agency. And I will be working with them, but we'll be working like alongside each other. So I will be going through my process as I normally do, process for
Yes. Yeah.
for uh, for some of the new pages and whatnot that they have, and Tiller Digital will go through their process as well. And we met up and we made sure that everything kind of jived. But that's pretty much the only way I'll work with an agency now, is like alongside or like serially. Like I'll do my work and then they'll do theirs, or vice versa.